what I want to focus on is the economy right now and how it's showing early signs already of a recession. We are currently in America on the path towards a recession, in my opinion, that I predict very likely could hit us around January or February. Right now, Christmas and the excitement of Christmas and the increase in spending, even if the spending is lower than projected, even if the spending is less than in prior years, it's going to be a massive influx. The economy is going to look stronger than ever to some degree. It's going to look hopeful. And then January is going to come and nobody spends anything in January. And that's going to lead us right into a recession in February. I'm just predicting that now. I've mostly been correct with my predictions on this channel. This one's a tough one to predict. You never know what kind of a rabbit Trump's going to pull out of his hat. He's been good at that. But on paper, what I'm seeing is recession, February. But it gets even worse than recession talks for February, and I'm going to explain to you why right now. Because if you think a recession is scary, wait till you hear what I think is going to happen at the end of 2026 or at the beginning of 2027. Because you see, the national debt of America is something I've been studying very intently this past year specifically. And I've come to a startling conclusion when it comes to it. Because the truth of the matter is, I desperately want to know if there's any solutions out there on how we can solve this national debt crisis, how we can fix up our economy, because the national debt is causing a massive problem for America, and it is hurting everyday Americans, despite what people want you to believe. They want you to think because we're the greatest superpower, it really doesn't matter. It's just red numbers on a piece of paper, but that is so wrong. And we must address the situation with the national debt or risk devastating consequences. And the biggest problem with the national debt is quite honestly the fact that we have now gone through over 55 or 60 years or more as a nation of reckless debt management by our elected politicians, presidents, and Congress alike. It's disgusting, actually, when you look at the historical trends of all of it. Now, I'm not going to go back all 55 years. It would simply just take too long video-wise, but I'm going to start with George Bush. January 20th, 2001, President George Bush takes office with the national debt at $5.73 trillion. By January 20th, 2009, when President George Bush was leaving office and President Obama was taking office, the national debt was at $10.63 trillion. President Obama fulfills 2 terms in a row. And so on January 20th of 2017, President Donald Trump is set to take office. And when President Donald Trump takes office, the national debt is at $19.95 trillion. Obama almost doubled it, just like Bush before him doubled it. And then you have January 20th, 2021. President Sleepy Joe falling up the stairs, Biden, is set to take office after Trump's first term. And the national debt had gone from $19.95 trillion to $27.75 trillion. So Trump didn't double it, but he certainly still raised it by almost $8 trillion total throughout his term. And then we fast forward to present day, once again, President Donald Trump taking office January 20th, 2025, where the national debt had gone from $27.75 trillion at the start of Biden's term to $36.21 trillion at the start of Trump's current term. And I'll tell you this right now, keep going back in time. Go to the Clinton administration, go to the George H.W. Bush administration, to Reagan, to Carter, to Gerald Ford, etc. And it does not get better. The only thing that looks better is the lower national debt number, which makes you then very frustrated at the idea that these presidents just continually took our national debt number for granted. And there's all kinds of arguments to be made. Well, Congress controlled the purse for a lot of these presidencies, so they were directly influencing it. And that's probably true. But at the end of the day, it's the president's name and his legacy that is associated with his terms. So I strictly am viewing it off of a presidential legacy perspective. And the bottom line is, all of these presidents for the last 60 years or more have completely failed Americans when it comes to a budget, when it comes to not increasing national debt. And our current national debt right now under Trump is already up $2 trillion or more because Trump entered with $36 trillion and we're now at $38 trillion. And that is why I am making this video, because I want to point out something very troubling. We are most likely heading for an economic collapse. And by that, I mean a total economic collapse. I'm hesitant to use the word depression. But at this point, it has been over 60 years in the making. People will, of course, blame President Donald Trump if this economic collapse happens. Rather unfairly so, in my opinion. It's not Trump's fault. It's not Biden's fault, actually. It's not Obama's fault. It's not Bush's fault. It's not Clinton's fault. H.W. Bush's fault. It's not Reagan's fault. It's not Carter's fault. It's not Gerald Ford's fault. It's all of their faults collectively. Really, that's what it is. And you can take the pie chart and you can try and slice bigger slices of the pie and say, well, Trump owns this big of a slice and Biden owns this big of a slice and Bush only owns this big of a slice because he was in a war. It doesn't fucking matter. What matters right now is we're on the verge of an economic collapse and nothing is being done about it that's appropriate. Even worse so, nothing can be done about it. I hate to sound like a doomer and blackpilled here, but that is what I'm going to demonstrate to you right now. We're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because like I said, our national debt is over $38 trillion already. It's gone up over $2 trillion under Trump this year alone, and it's going to continue to go up over $2 trillion each and every year. That's $4.25 million a minute. $250 million per hour and $6.12 billion per day. Those numbers are staggering. We go into debt $6 billion a day. It's astronomical. I literally can't wrap my head around that number. Worse yet, our interest on this debt is $1 trillion. And so that's really putting us in an even worse situation because $1 trillion in interest is more than what we spend altogether on our national defense budget. And that national defense budget was just raised the other day to $900 billion. We still outspend our national defense budget in merely interest alone. Not even on paying back the principal. And so this is why I am convinced a recession is coming in 2026 and there's nothing Trump can do to stop it. Social Security spending, for instance, is $1.4 trillion annually. Medicare spending is $1 trillion annually. Our national defense budget just got increased to $900 billion annually. By the way, we're still giving money to Ukraine and Israel. Isn't that wonderful? And on top of it, our interest payment on our debt alone is also $1 trillion. When you add all those numbers up, you literally come to a figure that's over $4 trillion a year in spending. And worse yet, our total federal revenue is only at $4.5 trillion per year. And it sounds crazy to say we're only at $4.5 trillion per year in total revenue. But truthfully, I get to actually say that because when we're spending over $4 trillion per year in all of these programs and on interest alone, we are literally spending almost the entirety of our nation's revenue on four main things. One of those things literally just being interest on our debt, which now literally is eating away at pretty much 25% of our total annual revenue. And so do you see the problem with this? Do you see why I'm starting to think that the economic crash is coming? Do you see why it seems like nothing can be fixed? When all is said and done, we have considerably less than even $500 billion to then spread thinly across all other government institutions and programs. I mean, our veterans. You ever wonder why veterans are homeless? This is why. And so what are the obvious answers here to solve this national debt crisis? None of them are good, to be frank. Cutting Social Security, for instance, would be a great option. And I know if you're a boomer, you're clutching your pearls hard on that one. I put money into that one, damn it. I was promised my Social Security, so don't you dare touch that. I'm just saying $1.4 trillion in spending annually on Social Security, a flawed and failing government program. But now let's give the even older people a heart attack by stating that the next most obvious answer, which is true, would be to cut Medicare. Oh my goodness, though, I need the government to keep me alive. And after that, spending less on our national defense is actually logically one of the other solutions. But of course, there are so many obvious problems with all of those answers. If you cut Social Security and you remove it entirely, like I actually think we should, well, you lose the boomer vote. The crusty old boomers, most of which are liberal anyway, most of which are despicable in my opinion, most of which are the reason we're in this economic mess to begin with, because collectively, they rightfully share the blame in tanking the American economy, drag racing across it for their own gain, knowing full well we would end up in the result that we're in right now, and that the younger generations, millennials and Gen Zers, and Gen Alpha, which is coming up soon, is collectively fucked. Do they give a shit? No. They want their Social Security, they want their retirement, and they want to hit the deceased line before the inevitable result hits, which is, of course, a total economic collapse. Unfortunately for them, I don't think they're going to be so lucky. I think that economic collapse is coming very, very soon. But yes, the problem is there's only really three main things we're spending the collective majority of our money on that's keeping us in so much debt. It's Social Security, it's Medicare, it's national defense, and then it's $1 trillion in interest on the national debt itself. If we could find ways to not be spending all of that, my God, we could actually start digging ourselves out of this hole. But the actual and obvious problem is no president would dare mess with any of these programs. Not even President Donald Trump, who has demonstrated from time to time that he actually has the cojones to do some good things. He won't do it. Trump is a populist. And even if it means watching our nation crumble, to be honest with you, Trump won't mess with these large deficit eating programs. And now here is the even worse part. The Federal Reserve. They're stuck. In fact, in my opinion, the Federal Reserve is trapped. That actually more accurately describes the current predicament that we're in. And, you go back in time on this channel, for instance, to all of my videos about Jerome Powell. I am heavily critical of that guy. He's a goober. He looks like the kind of guy that was bullied all throughout school. And perhaps a lot of the criticism that's been thrust upon him is well-deserved. However, I gotta admit now, I see things a little differently when it comes to the dynamic between Jerome Powell and Trump. And I'm gonna give you the spoiler alert on those two right now. Both of them are right and both of them are wrong. That's just how fucked our economy is, though. You see, because the Fed's job is to control the interest rates, and the Fed typically raises the interest rates to actively fight inflation. And you see, if the Fed raises the interest rates to actively fight inflation, the economy will almost certainly crash entirely. Raising rates would mean an even higher mortgage payment, and millennials and Gen Z are already unhappy that they can't own homes as it is. Not to mention, you go on to feed us that bullshit about 50-year mortgages. I mean, we're not trying to be slaves for our entire life simply so we can own a cheap piece of property. But on top of that, on top of feeding us 50-year mortgages, on top of us already being priced out of the housing market as it is, if you were then to raise the interest rates even more, I actually genuinely believe a housing revolution, the likes we've never seen in American history, would break out. But higher interest rates would also mean businesses couldn't afford loans. It would mean that the stock market would plummet. Unemployment rates would no doubt shoot up as well, and a massive recession would sweep across America. And so, okay, that means that Jerome Powell obviously needs to lower the interest rates quickly and as quick as possible and as low as possible to help support Trump and the current work that he's doing on our economy to save it, right? Well, it's actually not that easy, unfortunately. I've come to find out. Lowering interest rates or keeping them low means inflation continues, and the dollar will continue to lose value, all while prices continue to rise. And so if inflation continues and our dollar loses value, we get absolutely slammed economically as the middle and lower class Americans here. You think things are unaffordable now, it would potentially get much worse if Jerome Powell actually bottomed out the interest rates too quickly. That's what I've come to learn in all of this. He is slowly trying to deflate everything by lowering the interest rates 1/4 point per month, which frustrates a lot of Republicans and the Trump administration. Nevertheless, I actually still believe that no matter what either of them do, with Trump, of course, stating we can't keep printing money, and with Jerome Powell stating I can't just bottom out the interest rates, I'll lower it down slowly. I don't think any approach is going to work. I don't. I think the recession's coming. And on the topic of money printing, that quite honestly is the only solution our elected officials have leaned on and been able to come up with over decades now of national debt increases. They come up with this politically correct bullshit term called quantitative easing. And all of that is just politically correct terminology to cover for the fact that essentially what it means is print more money and buy this government debt up with that money, all while decreasing our dollar value. That's why they're printing like fiends. That's why Trump has been critical of the Fed. And like I said, rightfully so. We need to stop printing more money. We need to stop lowering our dollar value and driving up inflation. But we can't. And if you're wondering why, even under President Donald Trump, the stock market has been hitting record highs. I mean, it is soaring. It's been soaring, even despite the tariffs. Yet our prices, like I stated earlier in our first segment of this episode where I covered your community poll and read your comments, our prices aren't going down all that much. This is why. It's because the printing is happening at an astronomical rate because our debt is so sky high, we have no choice but to print our own money to buy up our own debt. It's ludicrous, actually. But the problem is if Trump gets his way on this and the Fed stops printing money, our government will almost instantly go bankrupt, essentially. And this is because we have crossed the point of no return, in my opinion. If the Fed stops all the money printing, our government can no longer fund itself in its current state. And again, Trump could start cutting Social Security, either massively so altogether. He could also target Medicare. And we could reduce our national defense budget. But being the populist that Trump is, he knows none of those fiscally wise options at this point would be popular decisions with people at all. And so since none of those roads will ever be taken by any populist candidate who cares about their presidential legacy, There's only one other option that truthfully remains, and it's also not a good one. You'd have to raise the taxes, and you'd have to unjustly and unfairly tax the American people who are not responsible for this national debt whatsoever. You'd have to take their money to start paying it back. And we've all seen over decades now how our own government manages an increase in revenue and funds at the expense of taxpayers. It never does anything. You ever been on a highway in your local state and paid ridiculous amounts of tolls, gone through toll booths? That's a tax on people for traveling, which is unlawful, by the way, and unjust and shouldn't be allowed. Yet there they are, collecting our fucking money from us. And then you get off the highway and you go onto the roads that are supposed to be maintained by our taxpayer dollars, and they're shit. They're full of potholes. They're not paved over. The paint on them sucks. When it rains, you can't see the lines on the road anymore because the government cheaped out and stopped using reflective paint in favor of regular paint. Because if you get into an accident, they don't give a shit about you. They don't care about the potholes causing flat tires and ruining the undercarriage of your car. They just don't care. The money is for the corrupt politicians, not to actually be responsible with, not for fiscal responsibility, not for being used to pay back the national debt. They tax you and they claim that's what it's for, and it never actually comes into fruition. And so what's left at that point, even with somebody like Trump, is to literally give in and say, okay, keep printing the money then, keep buying up the debt, and hopefully it doesn't all go to shit during my presidency. It's what Biden did. It's what Trump did in his first term to some degree. It's definitely what Obama did as well. It's just how it's going to go right now. But the problem is it's all reaching a tipping point. And one of the largest factors that is not being discussed in the media whatsoever is the de-dollarization. Because the theory here is, by most people, yes, we're in $38 trillion of debt, but America is the world's superpower. And not are we just America's superpower because of a military might standpoint, but our dollar is integrated as the global Federal Reserve. Other countries use our dollar, which keeps the value high enough and makes it enticing for these other countries to continually bailing us out by buying up our debt. China's done it. Other countries have done it. But that thought process is now coming to an end. A rude awakening is upon us. Because despite the fact that our dollar is still powerful and influential, and despite the fact that America is the leading superpower, mostly off of military might these days, it's not going to be that way for long, at least not with the dollar value. We have gotten away with printing more money to buy up our own debt, all while keeping our dollar as the established global Federal Reserve dollar for decades now, and it's coming to an end. These countries are sick of it. They see the writing on the wall when it comes to us printing our money and borrowing against ourselves, and quite honestly, they want out. And here's what the media, or our Trump administration for that matter, won't tell you. China and Russia are working together now, and they've built an alternative payment system that allows them to trade with their own currencies and bypass our American dollar altogether. Both China and Russia are also aggressively accumulating gold as well. And even worse yet, other countries around the world are receptive of what China and Russia are doing, working together to bypass our dollar and de-dollarize themselves. They're jumping in. Saudi Arabia is now selling oil to China and accepting yuan currency as payment. So much for our global Federal Reserve petrodollar. And the thing is, no matter what President Donald Trump does, he can't stop it. He can't stop Russia and China from building this alternative payment system and from trading solely amongst themselves. In fact, Trump, in part, forced this situation to happen, along with Biden as well, who increased the likelihood of it happening by sanctioning Russia. And Trump also can't stop Saudi Arabia from accepting other currencies for oil, like the yuan. Nothing can be done about this, and it's past the point of no return. And when you really think about it, what incentive is there for other countries nowadays to stay on our dollar and to stay using our dollar when essentially we convince them to buy our debt, and then when these countries do something we don't like, we threaten them with massive sanctions and essentially unfairly assume control of their financial circumstances and tell them, oh, well, that debt you bought from us doesn't matter anymore. We're not going to trade with you anymore. We don't really give a shit that you bought portions of our debt to help bail us out. You just did something we don't like. We're done with you. If you look at it from their country's standpoint specifically, and not from the lens of being an American, it is kind of bullshit. And so now, hopefully you're beginning to understand just how dire the circumstances are. But I'm here to tell you right now, it still gets worse from here. Because yes, we're printing more money than we can justify, all to buy up debt that we continually increase on. Where our interest is out of control at over $1 trillion, our spending is much too high. The interest rates are too high. The costs haven't come down. Jerome Powell can't fix it. Trump can't fix it. The world is moving away from our dollar slowly, and it's an unstoppable movement at this point. De-dollarization is happening. But I want to bring you back to the Social Security and Medicare expenses that I was mentioning earlier, because baby boomers are now at the retirement age, and they're set to collect on their Social Security, and they're expecting it. 10,000 people in America are turning 65 years old every single day in America, and these boomers demand their Social Security and Medicare that they paid into all throughout their working years. But there is a massive, massive problem when it comes to these programs. You see, because on one hand, no president would ever dare go against Social Security and Medicare. Every president wants to promise all retirement age workers that they will collect on those benefits that they paid into. Despite the fact that Medicare and Social Security, like I demonstrated earlier, eat away at literally $2.4 trillion of our spending annually. It's still there for them to receive, but it won't be for much longer. And this is the double-edged sword now that Trump specifically is going to have to deal with, and certainly the president after him. Because back in 1937, the first year that taxes began to be taken out of workers' paychecks to fund Social Security, the ratio of active American workers to retirees was 42-1. That means there were 42 people working for every one American retiring. But that ratio has declined and gotten worse with every decade following the implementation of Social Security. And you can see on this chart here a noticeable drop from the 1930s and 40s to 1950, where it dropped to 16.5 workers per retiree. And then 1960, 5, 1973, and a slower drop from there. But ultimately, we have now found ourselves in 2025. This graph doesn't show it, but we're at only 2.5 workers per American retiree. It's unsustainable. It's unaffordable. Social Security, one way or another, will vanish and disappear. And so, like I said, on one hand, you have all the politicians fighting to keep it around because it's so unpopular to move against Social Security, despite the fact that it eats away at so much of our annual budget here in America. On the other hand, there's an inevitable collapse of Social Security in and of itself that's going to occur. And there's so much that goes into this. AI is taking jobs away. AI doesn't pay taxes. AI won't fund Social Security as a result. AI actually costs money. But on top of it, you have disenfranchised younger generations. You have less jobs than ever. Those jobs are being handed away to immigrants. Immigrants aren't always on our taxing system right away. Illegal immigrants aren't on our taxing system at all. And so it's the perfect shitstorm that we're witnessing right now. And this is the problem with socialist ideas like Social Security. People should individually be ultimately responsible for their own retirement funds and money. When you bank on and even force everyone to be responsible for each other, it inevitably always fails. And make no mistake about it, Social Security is socialism, which is why I find it so ironic that the cranky, miserable, crusty, stupid boomer generation is screaming down from their houses that they own to the Gen Z and millennial generation who don't own homes for voting in people like Zohran Mamdani, a socialist. They want to talk about the evils of socialism and preach to us and lecture from us from their financially insulated lives and their houses, their privileged lifestyle that our generations will never get to live. They can't understand why socialism is on the rise here amongst the youth. Something I don't support, by the way. Nevertheless, I fully understand it. All the while, the boomers are the generation that have lived long enough to benefit the most from socialism. Now they're insistent upon being the ultimate beneficiaries of that, despite the fact that they know it will destroy our country. Because make no mistake about it, this graph right here demonstrates to you that they've always known that this was set up to fail. These numbers weren't a secret up until recently. They've been tracked diligently, decade by decade. The declining birth rates alongside now AI, which is magnifying the problem, are the reasons why Social Security is ultimately going to go bankrupt. It's a lose-lose situation no matter what you do. And just like everything else, it seems like at least some of the boomers will at least gotten their pay out of it. They'll at least have won long enough to be able to retire and then die. But the young generations are absolutely fucked. And so when you factor all of this in, you realize what we're dealing with here and why I think not only a recession is coming in February of next year, but I actually think it's all going to come crashing down during Trump's term at some point, very likely at the end of next year or beginning of 2027. If you enjoyed that clip, be sure to check out my YouTube channel where I have the full video where this clip was taken from published. And if you're America First like I am and you're an American advocate, be sure to subscribe and like the post. Thanks so much for watching.